I was treated like dirt at my son-in-law's gala until the real owner chose me. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, every crystal catching the light like frozen fire. A string quartet played softly as Boston's wealthiest drifted in silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. I clutched my invitation with trembling fingers, whispering to myself, "You belong here. Your daughter wanted you here." But the moment I stepped inside, Sylvia, the hostess, my son-in-law's mother, swept toward me like a queen guarding her throne. Her sequined dress shimmered, her perfume stung my nose. She gave me a long, deliberate look, her eyes sliding from my thrifted navy gown to the scuffed heels I'd polished 3 times that morning. "Well," she said sweetly, but loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "why don't you stand near the coat check? It's a bit crowded in here, and I wouldn't want you to feel out of place." Laughter rippled, not cruel but dismissive, the kind that stings worse than open mockery. Heat crawled up my neck. I wanted to disappear, to shrink into the marble floor. My daughter was across the room, radiant in her evening dress, pretending not to notice. My chest tightened. This was supposed to be my chance to be accepted, to show I wasn't the embarrassment Sylvia always thought I was. Instead, I found myself shoved to the margins, humiliated before the entire Boston elite, holding onto the last shred of dignity I had left. I stood by the coat check, clutching my small purse like a lifeline, watching champagne glasses sparkle as waiters glided past me. Conversations swirled, fundraisers, European vacations, stocks rising and falling, languages I'd never learned to speak. My throat tightened. What was I even doing here? The humiliation pulled me backward in time, back to my quiet apartment in Pittsburgh where I'd lived alone since Henry died. The pension barely covered groceries, let alone luxuries. I'd learned to cut coupons, mend my own coats, and stretch casseroles to last a week. When my daughter married into Sylvia's family, I thought it was a blessing, love, stability, maybe a bridge between worlds. But at every dinner, every gathering, I'd been reminded that I was the librarian mother from Pittsburgh. Not Evelyn, not a woman who'd raised her daughter through night shifts and hospital bills. Just a label, just background noise in their glossy lives. At their wedding, I wore my best blue dress, the same one I'd worn at Henry's funeral. I remember Sylvia's whisper to another guest, "She looks quaint." My chest had burned then too, but I'd smiled, pretending not to hear. And now here I was again, quaint, outdated, and invisible. For 3 years, I'd hoped for a chance to prove I belonged. I had told myself this gala would be it. But as I stood in that gilded museum, pushed to the shadows like an unwanted guest, I realized the truth. In their eyes, still, deep down, another truth stirred. I had survived too much in life to let a sequined woman and her smirking friends decide my worth. I slipped out of the ballroom for air, my cheeks burning from forced smiles and whispered judgments. The marble hallway felt colder, quieter, almost merciful. That's when I remembered what had happened just before I even walked in tonight. Outside the museum, while the valets hurried to park polished Bentleys and BMWs, I'd seen an old man crouched near the curb. Papers, sketches maybe, were scattered across the wet pavement, fluttering in the wind. Guests in gowns and tuxedos stepped around him as though he were invisible. I couldn't just pass by. "Here, let me help," I'd said, stooping down, ignoring the damp concrete soaking through my dress hem. The man looked up, startled, his eyes sharp but tired. His hands trembled as he tried to gather the sketches, each one smudged with pencil lines of faces and buildings. I pressed them back into order and held them carefully, like they were glass. "You shouldn't be out here in this cold," I told him gently. He chuckled, a low, rough sound. "And yet, here I am. Seems the world doesn't wait for old men who drop their lives on the sidewalk." I smiled. "Well, tonight it does." He studied me a moment longer, then said, "George, just George. He tucked the damp papers under his arm. "Thank you, Mrs. Evelyn," I said simply. "Evelyn Harper." He gave the faintest nod, almost like he was filing my name away. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Just another human moment, the kind that matters even if no one notices. But now, standing alone in that grand museum hallway, I saw him again, no longer hunched in an old coat, but in a perfectly cut suit, moving among the board members with quiet authority. His face was the same. His sharp eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on me, recognition flickered. George wasn't just some stranger I'd helped. He was someone who mattered here, and suddenly, I had the strange, unshakable sense that tonight's story wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I stayed in the shadows of the gallery, pretending to study a marble bust while my ears caught every fragment of conversation floating from the ballroom. Sylvia's laughter, sharp as glass. The rustle of gowns, the clink of champagne glasses, the quiet hum of power. But my eyes weren't on them. They were on him, George. He wasn't mingling like a guest. He was watching. Moving from group to group with the kind of ease that said he'd been here 1,000 times, but never for show. Every handshake lingered, every glance carried weight. And when his gaze found me again, just for a second, I felt it. A silent acknowledgement, not pity, recognition. I straightened my shoulders. For years, I'd tried to win this family over by playing their game, buying a dress I couldn't afford, polishing my words to sound refined, shrinking myself so I wouldn't embarrass my daughter. And for what? To be seated by a coat rack like a forgotten handbag. Not tonight. I took a glass of water from a passing tray, not champagne. My hands steadied around the cool stem. I wasn't leaving, not this time. If Sylvia wanted me hidden, I would remain exactly where I was, but with eyes open, ears sharp, waiting. Because something told me George, just George, wasn't just a kind old man. And if he was about to shift the ground beneath this glittering room, I intended to be standing right where the cracks began to show. For the first time that evening, I wasn't afraid of being seen. I was waiting to be heard. Sylvia's voice cut through the ballroom like the hiss of a knife. "Ladies and gentlemen," she purred into the microphone, "we are honored to have among us Evelyn Harper, my son-in-law's mother-in-law, visiting all the way from Pittsburgh." Her pause was deliberate. Her smile was sweet poison. "She's a retired librarian." A ripple of laughter, soft, polite, but unmistakably cruel, slid across the room like oil. Heads turned. Eyes flicked to my second-hand gown, my scuffed shoes, my plain hair. Heat burned behind my eyes. My instinct was to sink into the floor, to disappear, but before I could even take a step back, a voice rang out, firm and unshakable. "Correction!" Gasps fluttered through the room as George, no longer in his rumpled coat but in a flawless suit, stepped forward from the crowd. His cane tapped once against the polished floor, silencing the whispers. "This woman," he said, his voice carrying over the chandeliers, "is Evelyn Harper, and she is the only guest here tonight who remembered that kindness matters more than appearance." The ballroom froze. She stopped in the freezing wind to help me when I was on that sidewalk. George continued, his sharp eyes sweeping the room. "While the rest of you stepped over me, too worried about your gowns and tuxedos." She bent down in her best dress to gather what mattered to me, not for applause, not for recognition, simply because it was the right thing to do. My breath caught. The crowd stared, stunned, unsure how to respond. Sylvia's painted smile faltered just slightly, and for the first time that night, I wasn't the one under the microscope. They were. Sylvia let out a brittle laugh, high-pitched and hollow. "Well, that's touching," she said, her jeweled hand fluttering in the air. "But surely this isn't the time for sentimental street stories. Tonight is about art, legacy, and serious patrons." Her words dripped with condescension. A few guests chuckled nervously, eager to fall back in line with her authority. But George didn't even blink. He straightened, his voice sharp enough to slice through marble. "Patrons, legacy, my dear Sylvia, what do you think this is?" He held up one of the sketches Evelyn had rescued from the wet sidewalk. Pencil lines of a young woman's face, fierce, determined, alive, seemed to stare back at the entire room. "These," he said, his voice booming now, "are the earliest drafts of this museum's foundation. My drafts." A murmur surged through the crowd. Eyes widened. Champagne glasses paused midair. George Whittaker. The name whispered from lips around the ballroom like a secret escaping all at once. The founder. The man whose name was etched into the marble archway above the entrance. The very reason the gala even existed. Sylvia's face drained of color. "Mr. Whittaker, surely you don't mean—" "I mean exactly this," George interrupted, his cane striking the floor with authority. "You all paraded past me as I struggled outside tonight, too blind with pride to see the man who built this place. Every one of you failed that test. Every one of you, except Evelyn Harper." The silence was deafening. Even the string quartet had gone still, bows suspended midair. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a wild rhythm against my ribs. Me, the invisible librarian, the coat check embarrassment, standing in the center of a storm I hadn't even known I'd walked into. George's eyes, sharp as glass, swept across the glittering room. "Legacy," he repeated slowly, his gaze landing on Sylvia. "It's not about gowns or titles. Legacy is about values. And tonight, this woman reminded me of the one thing that built all of this, human decency." Sylvia's lips trembled. She tried to smile, but the power was gone. For the first time all night, she looked small. And for the first time in years, I stood taller. George let the silence stretch long enough for every glittering guest to feel the weight of it. Then he stepped closer to me, resting one steady hand on my shoulder. "Tonight," he said, voice calm but carrying steel, "I choose to honor character over costume. I choose Evelyn Harper." A ripple shot through the crowd. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. "Evelyn," George continued, "for years I've searched for someone with the courage to remind this institution why it exists, not just to display art, but to serve people. You, a retired librarian from Pittsburgh, showed more wisdom and integrity in a single act of kindness than I've seen in this hall for decades." He turned, addressing the board members clustered near the stage. "As of this evening, Evelyn Harper will be named Community Trustee of the museum's board. She will oversee new initiatives to ensure this place belongs to everyone, not just the privileged few." The room erupted, gasps, whispers, outrage. Sylvia's pearls clutched tight against her throat. "This is absurd," she hissed. She's nobody." "No," George cut in sharply. "She is exactly the kind of person this world needs more of. Someone who kneels in the rain to help a stranger, not someone who sneers from the safety of a chandelier." Applause began hesitant at first, then swelling, unstoppable. Guests who minutes ago had laughed at me now clapped, some even standing. Faces flushed with shame or awe or both. I stood trembling, my thrifted dress still damp at the hem, as if the floor beneath me had shifted forever. Sylvia's face burned crimson. She turned to protest again, but George's voice boomed one last time. "True wealth isn't written in checkbooks. It's written in deeds." Tonight, Evelyn Harper reminded us all of that truth. And this museum, my museum, will never forget it. And just like that, the power in the room was no longer hers. It was mine. The ballroom shifted. Where once there had been stares of pity and whispers of mockery, now there were outstretched hands, warm smiles, and voices eager to introduce themselves. "Mrs. Harper, I'd love to hear about your work with the library. You must tell me that story about the sketches again. For years, I'd been invisible in these circles. Tonight, I was suddenly the center of them. And yet, I didn't feel pride so much as clarity. Nothing about me had changed. Only their vision had. My daughter appeared, her eyes shimmering. She took my hand quietly, squeezing it. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm so proud of you." For the first time since her marriage, I saw her not torn between two worlds but standing firmly beside me. Sylvia, on the other hand, had retreated to a corner, her jeweled smile frozen into something brittle and hollow. She wasn't defeated by me, she was defeated by the truth, and that truth would echo long after tonight. As the evening wound down, George approached me once more. "Evelyn," he said, his sharp eyes softening, "you reminded me why I built all this in the first place. Not for power, not for reputation, but for people. Don't ever forget that's your strength." I nodded, the weight of his words settling into my chest. For the first time in years, I felt not like a guest desperately trying to belong, but like someone standing exactly where she was meant to be. Later, as I left the museum, the December air cut sharp against my cheeks. Boston's lights glittered on the harbor, cold but alive. I pulled my coat tighter around me, the damp hem of my thrifted dress brushing against the sidewalk. Once, I might have wished to walk out in silk, in diamonds, in the approval of people like Sylvia. But not anymore, because tonight had taught me something far greater. Respect isn't bought. Belonging isn't begged for. And dignity, true dignity, comes from never letting others decide your worth. I had walked in as the embarrassment from Pittsburgh. I walked out as Evelyn Harper, librarian, mother, and now the woman who had reminded Boston's elite that character shines brighter than any chandelier. Some galas change your outfit. This one changed my place in the world.